All right. This is going to be fun. Here's out of the way. The first couple I did, oh my goodness, I was so nervous. I'll show you kind of what I worked on yesterday, which is kind of cool. I haven't done a self-portrait since like ninth, 10th, 11th grade. And someone told me that I needed to do one. So that's what I did yesterday and the day before, just to study. But anyway, thought I would share that with you. And so the one thing I do is I use Gamsol. Gamsol is a solvent. There are a bunch of different solvents out there. One is Turpenoid, which is I've used most of my oil painting career. But it's not turpentine, so it's a lot softer. It's not as toxic. But Gamsol is terpenoid as a superhero. It actually is terpenoid without the smell. So Gamsol, you don't have that woof of turpentine smell. And they all work the same if you can handle the turpentine. And so you can try to keep up with me, but don't worry about it if you can't. When you start learning to do to paint and to put proportions from your reference photo and onto your canvas, one of the tricks is to do the exact size that you're painting on your print or your reference. So that's what I've done. This is actually, I get in Photoshop and I say a 8x10, and then I crop it and I move it around to where it really fits where I want. And what's cool about this is I'm using the 1/3 rule. So if I go 1, 2, 3, and then I do 1, 2, 3 down to the bottom, then this third is kind of where the focus is, which is the front of the horse, the eyeball. That's going to be on my 1/3 rule. When I am working with oils and when I'm working with washes, I'm actually going from light to dark. When I am doing a portrait or a gallery piece and working on oils, once I do the wash and the block in, then I start working from dark to light. So when I'm doing washes, I'm looking at this. I'm looking at the light first, and then I'm going to see darker values, darker and darker and darker until it goes back here and the muzzle and the chin and the eye and the rump, all in the 90 to 100% black area. So once I get over that, watercolorists, they look the same way. They usually go from light to dark. But then when I start adding color, like we're doing in our course, 8-day course, after that, we start going from dark to light. And so today, when we're working with our terpenoid or our solvent, make sure you keep it very, not overly wet, so it will dry. And don't go thick with paint either, because we'll get messy at the layers. When we paint in oils, we always start very thin, and then we get thicker and thicker and wait for the gooey, blobby color or paint at the very end. And that can be, if you look at any Rembrandt, you're going to see that his whites and his yellows are just like caked on, but his backgrounds and browns are just like, they're soft washes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use, I've got a Sybillo pencil that I like using when I paint. And I am going to use my caliper. Now, you can use a piece of paper to do measurements. In other words, let's see. So if I'm using a paper and I'm going to use the muzzle for measurements, I might mark the width of the muzzle, and that's my measuring device. Okay, so then I use this line to go, all right, it's 1, 2, 3 1/4 to the top of the head here. And I can use it to say at the eye, it's 1.5 from the eye to the bottom of the chin. And I can see that the neck is 1, 2, ooh, just almost 2¼ 2⅛ thick here. And I can measure from the eye to the rear. And I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the edge. Now, another advantage to print out your reference exactly is I can use my calipers to know exactly where the edge of the 8x10 is to the eye. So I can go here and put a little mark, and then I can go here. So I know that the eye is right there. All right. I can say to the nose, I can go from the edge, it's this far. And I can go from the top, because I can't really find the bottom. All right, so there's my angle, and there where the nose is, and I just connect that line right there. Then I can do the muzzle shape. And I can connect those shapes that I see. Again, I'm not thinking horse, I'm looking at the angles, I'm looking at the negative space. And you probably have people that use grid systems to get all this information over, that's fine. But I'm constantly looking at, I'm going back and forth here, and I'm looking at the angle of underneath the chin. Just laying stuff in, laying information in. So from the bottom of the chin to where it meets the shoulder, laying that in. What's cool about painting is it's all about what you are excited about, what you like. It doesn't have to be perfect. Michael Jordan said that he missed more shots than he's ever made in his life. That's what it's all about. So I'm looking at the edge of the eye to the ear. As you draw more and more, you don't have to do these measurements as much. You can actually do it with your eye. So actually using the calipers is fun for me because it stops me and slows me down a little bit. I'm gonna measure between the ears. Horse's ears are really cool. We're not going to see it today because of the nose and the ear, but the shape of the ears are a lot like the shape of the nose when you're looking straight at it. And I think because I've always drawn my entire life, I like to draw my images out before. I'm going to find out where the rear is here. And so a little tick mark there. I'm going to bring it down. It's not straight across, so it is down. And where the pelvis bone meets the vertebrae, it's about that far. Then that still is going down. If you look at that, the vertebrae is not horizontal. Horizontal is this way. It's down at that angle. And I can move that over here. Do it again. There's a saying in construction, measure twice, cut once. And it is okay to stop and say, is that measurement right? And once I get two different positions here, then I can start looking. I can look where that shape there is that distance. It curves up and over. All right, what's wonderful about this is that I have now pretty much have my entire painting in. If I want to give some more tip marks, I can do that, but it's not necessary. That little muscular structure right there, I love that. It's one of my favorite parts of a horse. This big cheek is like, huh. When I got into painting horses, so my wife, I was at one of my gallery openings and I did just figure work before this. And she's like, you've got to do horses. You're in horse country. I'm like, ugh, I don't want to be a sellout. And so I said, I'll do one or two horses for my next show. And what happened was that I started doing horses and did more horses and did a lot of horses. And I became the equestrian artist. So never know. Don't ever limit yourself and say, I am not going to do this. Because you never know. All right, so this gives me a lot of information, so I can go ahead and get started painting now. One of the persons that I've been working with on a one-on-one is we talked about put more time in design so that when you actually start getting into paint, you can paint and not worry about placement. So many people see professional artists paint so fast. It's because they've done this process so many times, they can put all this information on fast and not worry about it. But when you are starting to draw or paint, take the time to create the blueprint to make a strong painting. So, let's get into this. So I use burnt umber deep for my paint, and I'm just going to put a little blob. I mean, that's tiny, but that's really all we're going to need today. And I am going to work with a larger brush at first. Okay, so this is going to be like a 1/2 inch flat. What I like about flats is that you can paint with that edge and you can turn it sideways and create a thin line too. You can also do that with rounds and filberts and stuff, but flats really allow me to lay on paint really good. Now I put all of my paints in this stuff called brush dip, and it's an oil that keeps the brush fresh until I use it again. I used this just yesterday. You can see that doing my portrait, there's still a little bit left on here. It's the same color, so I'm not really too concerned about it, but I'm gonna completely take all of that brush dip off, but it's oil, so it's not gonna mess up my painting. What I've opened up is my Gamsol, and I'm gonna take just a little bit of it, I dip it to the side, then I bring it over to my paint. Bringing it to the side allows a lot of excess to go off to the side. I do that when I start getting into oils, when I use my linseed oil later, I still do that. I'll dip into it, dip it to the side so it's not just glopping on it. Again, I'm not taking a lot on my brush, but making it just enough. And what I'm going to do here is I want to go ahead and shape in the horse. Cutting in is another a word that's used a lot. This is my main subject, so I'm not sure how my background's going to be at the moment. So I'm going to just play with the positive shape. So I'm using the edge of that flat. And so, because I did all my measurements before, I'm not worried about where I'm putting the paint because I'm now painting between the lines. Paint what you see, not what you know. My eye is constantly going, as I'm working, I am going from my painting to the reference photo over and over. Unless you're working from your imagination, constantly go. Now I did, this line is actually beginning of the hair. So the hair is gonna flow from here. So I'm not worried about that. It's a little bit lighter, so I'm not gonna work on that right now. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can type them into the chat box and Christy will read them to me and I'll try to answer the best I can. I love drips like that. That's fun. Let it go. Okay, so this is all wet for me right now. Now, one of my favorite things on these classes is a brush away. So I just get a shop towel and I am going to just brush through it. What this does is it blends all my brush strokes and also softens what I'm doing. Also, it creates an atmosphere around it, and I am not worried about it going between the lines. This is where, before we're working with the lines, and now I'm playing away from the lines. So from this point on, I'm going to start building my values. And those that are new with me, it's really good to get a value chart like this. This is a grayscale and value finder. And when you're working with black and white, you can put a little circle on different parts to find out what value. So on that cheek here, I see that it's at a 90% value. But if I put that over here on the background, it's going to be darker. So that's actually closer to 100%. And then over here, I can start playing with it. I'm going to squint my eyes to see that that's probably close to a 50%, maybe a 60%. So these are invaluable to start learning values. There's a saying that color gets all the credit and value does all the work. And it's so true. One of my favorite quotes. And I've got a lot of them. So I'm going to start now building in my values. So I've got under the chin here, start building up that value. And that whole muzzle area, muzzle, it's very dark. Nice. Eye. If you've never looked at a horse skull, look it up, Google it, horse skull. They've got a very bizarro skull. Then the rest of it, the face is created with the tendons and the muscle structure. It's just, they're magnificent animals. Because I've studied human anatomy my entire life, I got into horse anatomy. It's amazing. One of my favorite things, my aha moments is their front legs are actually half of it is into the body. So it reminds me of the people that used to do or I guess they still do, the baggy pants. So like half of the horse's leg is showing through the baggy pants. So. So I'm looking at this value here, and I'm going to go ahead and get it darker a little bit. And I'm going to soften that edge there. And I'm just lightly rubbing. All right, so now I want to envelope my entire piece. I love this background because it really highlights that hair coming through there. So I'm going to lay in a dark value all the way here. Maybe just brush this off a little bit where it's softer. So I'm going a little bit less solvent, but a lot more pigment. I'm bringing that. Of course, I just got finished telling you that I wouldn't use much more than that. I think I might add a little bit more to that shortly. Again, I'm cutting in that ear. I can still see the pencil mark a little bit through. That's what I like about that style pencil. It's that it, and I've got just a cheap brush, super cheap brush that I love. It really shows brush strokes. Did a lot of that with my self-portrait. What I use these studies for in my professional life is that when I'm working with a painting, like my 5 foot by 7 foot painting, you don't just jump into that. You do a lot of study beforehand. And I'm going to bring some color down below here so that pops. Painting, you want to use a mop at first and go all the way to a hair. So we're at the 36, 37-minute mark. Christy, I'm actually watching my own time this time. When I'm doing my painting, I love the shapes of the horse and the angles, and that's kind of what creates and dictates my brush strokes sometimes. Took me a couple of classes to learn how to do this camera on my palette for you, but I know it's very important when I'm working to actually see how I'm manipulating the palette. I so appreciate the artist of Middleburg's Gallery to sponsor me and allow me to do these courses for you. It's quite an honor to do these classes.
So happy to have you with us. And so far, no questions. So
That's all right. That's all right. That means people are painting.
yep.
Like, leave me alone. Let me paint. I'm going to start using a technique to pull paint away with the solvent right now. And when you see me working with my towel, I'm lightly touching it. I'm not doing a lot with it. A thing called lost edges. If you squint your eyes, you're going to see where the neck meets that background color. It's almost the same value, and it kind of just, it loses it. So like right there and right underneath it, it's kind of the same value. So I mean, I can just brush through it. It's just going to be the same value. Then I can go darker with that. Okay, so I have played enough with my large brush to get a lot of paint on the canvas. I'm going to go to my second layer, the second level of paint brush, and which is like more. That was a ½ inch. It's more. This is going to be closer to a ¼ inch. And again, I have my brush dip on it. I really need to buy into that company because I keep selling it, but it's amazing, amazing work. I put my, and I'll show you at the very end, I put my brushes into this stuff called brush dip at the end, and I just leave it on there and put it here on my brush holder, and it stays for weeks. Yummy. Okay, so I'm going to a smaller brush. That means I can work on more detail. I tend to use the edge of my brush more than like pulling through. I actually use the thinner part of it to paint with, and that's just a personal preference. Being aware of the values, the darks and the lights as we're going along. I used to laugh at all the instructors that would talk so gently when they're painting, but I realized I do the same thing. When you're concentrating on painting, it's the voice that comes out. An hour is such a short time to create a painting. So move to the side, do a little dab before I go into the paint so I don't overdo it with the solvent. So solvent actually eats away paint. So when you're doing this, be aware that you're using a process that actually dissolves. It's solved. It's a solvent. It dissolves the paint. So be very careful not to overdo it. So now you'll see me using my shop rags I'm constantly taking paint off of my brush so that I have full control. Clean brushes are so important. Again, values. I'm looking for the dark to the light. And what makes this painting, which I love and I can't wait to start working on the details, but is it's a lot of just darkness, and what creates the excitement is all this light here. It's coming around the horse here and here. And I'm gonna start working on that shortly. And part of what's going to make that exciting is how dark that gets in right there. So I want to make sure that that darkness is there. So my wife teaches with Zoom, and she works with clients on Zoom. So we have become Zoomaholics. We had to reinvent our careers through this quarantine of ours. Of course, I said that's all the paint you need. I might need some more paint. So that, I'm looking at that value. Being playful. It's still gonna be darker in there. And I know I'm at my 15-minute mark to the hour. So we're gonna start thinking about what I need to do to finish this up. Again, I'm looking at the values. And I'm using what's called a dry brush. So I'm completely taking off turpentine and paint, and then I can use that to blend. All right, so one of my fun things I do every class is my Turpenoid or solvent splatter. So I am going to use my Turpenoid in a spray bottle. This is something you can do in the future, whatever you want. I'm gonna do a light. And it gives just a little bit of texture. Sometimes I overdo it, so I've got to be careful here. So if you can see, it's eating away the paint. So you see these dots that are appearing. That's the solvent coming down. And the burnt sienna is not a toxic paint, so I'm not concerned about using gloves around it. At this part, I just love that it just gives texture. So now I'm going to start taking away paint, and I'm going to use this like an 1/8" brush that has brush dip on it. So I'm going to clean that off completely. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip into my solvent, and I'm going to clean it off. And I'm looking
Jay,
at,
you already mentioned it, but it's 1:45, so you've got 15 more minutes.
yes. So I'm looking at my bright here. So I'm going to take my solvent. You can see it eats away that paint. And I can start brushing the hair out. This is, so the hardest thing to do for me, and I know it is for you, is to wait to do the details. You want to start the details immediately. And the details are at the very end. This is when, like the highlight, when you're doing a portrait of an eye, you know, that's at the very end. And I have to mention that this is from a photograph by Deborah Morrow, which is a local photographer. I've been using most of her paintings during my classes here. She's an amazing photographer, and she even does artwork too. So I actually bought one of her pieces for my wife years ago, long before I even knew her. And we've We only know each other from Facebook, so we've never even met in person. So keeping this is not, I'm not worried about pigment on this brush. It's a hard bristle, and I'm putting solvent on it.
Oh, and we have one question from Karina. She said, so is he using Gambrel to whiten?
Gamsol, yes. So my solvent is Gamsol. So I am putting this on my brush. The Gamsol is then lifting up, eating into the solvent. So I'm dipping it, you can see I'm dipping into the Gamsol. I'm bringing it to my brush or my cloth, and I'm drying it off just a little bit. So it's still a little bit wet with Gamsol. And then I am pulling it through my paint, and it's basically eating it away. And just a little bit descriptive with it, it's like acid. It's like, ah. And because this is not a portrait, I am not concerned with this being perfect. If I was doing a portrait, I would be looking at all the details. Keeping my brush clean, because while I'm using this solvent, it's actually picking up pigment. So if I don't clean my brush, then it's just going to be laying that pigment back down on it. All right. So I'm looking at this right here, this highlight. I'm going to pick that up. See how it brightens up that edge? Cleaning off my brush, huge. Clean brush is huge. That might be all I need for that edge, because I really want to pay attention to this side. So I'm going back into my Gamsol or my solvent. If you're doing pencil work, it's just using your eraser. Recreating that edge of the ear. So many people use erasers as a fix, but erasers are actually a tool. So it's okay to use an eraser, but draw light enough that you don't have to use it as an oops. You can just use it as a technique. So last week, if you joined us, you had the wonderful experience of me failing and learning that they don't all work. All paintings don't work. I was not happy with it, but that was, I think, part of the lesson was that it's okay. Give yourself a break. It's all just a process. Oh, but this one is starting to shine. So I'm looking at the edges where that light's hitting, so it's backlit. And that's what's so cool. Do little details. We can do details now. We're at the end of the painting. And my eye is going back and forth from my paint. Sometimes I'm doing a brush stroke and looking at the reference photo at the same time. So oh, yummy. I love horses. My passion is with human portraiture and figure work, but horses, I mean, it's as close as I've gotten to that passion is with my horses. So if you get really good at painting horses and you live in the Middleburg area, I need you to move away because it's my area. And I'm joking. There's room for everyone. This is where painting just really comes together. It's just this little details. Don't get hung up on the details at the beginning because the details have their time. Again, I'm painting with Gamsol now. I'm painting with the solvent. We're at 5 minutes to the hour. So I'm going to start molding in cheekbone. So when you're painting initially, once you start practicing, you can start knowing what you can do and what you can't do, and knowing what you can do later to finish up a painting like this. I knew that this detail I was going to do now. It wasn't earlier, just wasn't the time. Okay, this is just yummy. Loving this piece right now. Mm. And Christy, who's our host today, is upset because she didn't get to paint. She's got to be too focused on hosting, which I really appreciate the host because it allows me just to paint and not worry about reading chat or anything else.
I've been sketching here and there.
What? You're cheating? I knew you couldn't resist. So here's what I was talking about, where I'm using my Gamsol and it's just picking up and just smearing the pigment. So I'm using the Gamsol and I'm cleaning my brush and I'm coming back and picking up the pigment. Wow. Oh my goodness, this is so fun. All right, I am going to do my second favorite fun thing, and I'm gonna put my glove on, doctor, and load it with solvent, using the rest of my pigment, and I'm gonna throw some black or not black, but the rest of my paint on my palette. And we're gonna call that done. So I am going to take everything off. So if you do not have brush dip, then I would say you're going to go into your solvent and you're going to clean it. I look at solvent as brush killer. So as soon as you can, contact me and get you in contact with people in Austin that make brush dip. It is amazing. So most artists will do that, and then they're going to use the solvent over and over until it's completely clean. What I do, and I have a huge bottle, so I actually use this. So this is like oil that just never dries. It's beautiful. So I'm dipping it in, and then I'm reshaping my brush on the edge of the jar. Doesn't have to be thick on there, but I'm reshaping my brush. Okay, and then I set it there, and that's where it sets until I use it again. I try not to let it sit for over 2 weeks, but I have, and it's fine if you do that. But I know it's safe for weeks. All right, let me, Christy, you can take everybody off mute.
All right.
I'm going to unshare this. My camera. Whew.
That was really fun, Jay.
Oh my goodness, that was a fun one. 3 cheers to Deborah
Yeah.
for a beautiful photo to work from.